Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. This is episode number 546, and our guest is one of you guys, a listener of the show, Ryan, who joins us to share about his archery elk season from this year, as well as years previously when he struggled to find, see, or kill an elk. This is a very realistic story at what it looks like to hunt elk on your own on public land, and in Ryan's case, mostly solo as well. So how did Ryan stick through the dry years to then fill a tag last year on a cow, and then this year on his first bull? We get into all that and much more in this episode that I know you will enjoy and benefit from. If you guys are enjoying the podcast, it does help us if you can leave a rating or review in your podcast app. Hit pause and do that now if you can, or just consider sharing the show directly with a friend who may benefit from it as well. Thank you guys for taking the time to do that. Let's dive right into this conversation with Ryan. Ryan, just to give listeners context a bit about who you are, where you come from, hunting experience, like don't need to tell your life story, but give us a little glimpse.
So I guess most people ask you what you do. They're essentially asking you what you do for work. So I don't really like to describe myself as what I do for work, but I am, I guess, from a background of what I like to do. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I do a lot of design work. So that's one of the aspects of your podcast that I've enjoyed lately, is listening to you guys talk about your design process and why you do things the way you do. So I guess that it does interest me.
Nice.
And I design stuff for the oil and gas field for like subsea wellhead equipment. So I guess the stakes of things that I do and mistakes I make could cost customers millions of dollars. So that's something I envy about you guys. You take input from people, and you do what you do, and people either like it, or you can make a change and make it the way you want, way you like it.
Yeah.
But from my hunting background, I grew up in Arizona. So I am familiar with Western hunting from as a kid. And I primarily grew up hunting dove, quail, some waterfowl. And I did get into, or we did a lot of big game hunting, primarily related to elk. So we started elk hunting in Arizona. And that was my dad, my brother, and I go out essentially a week at a time during school. So take off school and go. We were looking for primarily hunting cow elk, and took us 3 years of nothing. And then that fourth year, we eventually, I think I was 14 or 15. My brother's 2 years older than me, so he was 16 or 17. And we dropped 3 elk out of one herd on that hunt. And I have a pretty good appreciation for my dad, I guess, at the time. Just thinking, if I was out there with my kids and we dropped 3 elk, it looks like a handful. But that was a long day for us, but probably especially him, getting all those elk cleaned up and out of the field. I picked up a bow when I was in high school in Arizona at like 16, and just dabbled in over-the-counter tags like javelina, Coues deer. Never successful in any of those. Those are, at least Coues deer, a pretty difficult challenge with the bow. But we did come to Texas a lot. So that's where I went to college. I came to college in Texas, and did a lot of archery hunting for whitetail, like over feeders and stuff like that. But ever since high school, I never got back into Western archery hunting until somewhat recently in 2018. is when I first went out archery elk hunting. And that first night when I was I was backpack hunting. So loaded up whole camp and hiking back there. That first night I called in a nice 6x6. I was thinking, man, this is easy. But of course, after that, it's never been the same. But my setup in that call was not right, so I was basically hung out to dry. Didn't get a shot. I didn't get my bow drawn, but he stopped behind a bunch of trees covering his vitals at like probably 10 or 15 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just looking at each other for several minutes until I figured I'd try to draw my bow and call him and stop him and get a shot off. But yeah, he took off and never stopped. And that was essentially the closest I had gotten to a bull since this year.
And that was 2018?
That was 2018. So yeah, 7 years later, finally got a shot.
Dang. So you go from early in the hunt on, essentially your first, like, other than the stuff with your dad growing up, your first real elk hunt of like, oh yeah, great encounter. This is easy. And then did you hunt elk pretty much all those years in between 2018 and this year?
Yeah. I don't think
Wow.
there was any year where I didn't go. They weren't all archery hunts. So I did mix in a couple of rifle hunts. I did draw a Utah rifle September tag, which I thought was a slam dunk. But it was like the highest draw odds. Turns out that unit is primarily a wintering area for elk. So there weren't a whole lot of elk there. I hunted 14 days and didn't see a single bull. I saw a herd of cows, but that was it. So that was a rough hunt. I did have a muzzleloader tag as well in this unit that I ended up going this year. It's about 4 years ago. So I hunted September with a muzzleloader, and I did actually that year. I shot a bull and never found him. So I guess I was listening to your podcast yesterday, and so I definitely feel for you on your shot and not finding him. So that was me. That was me a few years ago. I had shot him. He dropped and ran off, and I looked that night and the next day, and I didn't see a single drop of blood anywhere. So I'm not sure what happened there, but the third year, so I'd hunted archery elk in Montana one year. Again, we got into elk, but no shots. And also, all of these hunts have been solo, except for that Montana hunt. My dad went with me on that one, but all of these have been solo hunts. So last year I did get my first elk with my bow, and it was a cow. And it is close to the area that I went to this year, but it was a neighboring unit that I had been in before with a rifle. And I went back with the bow, and so last year was my first successful archery hunt for elk.
Your experience is much more common and much closer to reality than what most hunters see and hear, right? Like whether you're listening to podcasts, watching YouTube, looking at social media, you see all these people and all these tags filled and everything else. But the reality is the success rates, you can generalize them are 10%, right? Especially with mixing archery hunts in there a lot. So your early success in terms of encounters, and then years, excuse me, and then years of like struggle and yeah, different places, different weapons, different encounters, – and then last year and this year's success, which we'll get to. a lot of people get so dejected, some give up, and I think that would be even much easier to do if they did most of these hunts solo, because most people are at least suffering through it with somebody, like a buddy. So I find it impressive and admirable that you stuck through those dry years, especially solo, except for that one with your dad, and just kept after it, dude. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, one of the aspects of solo hunting, and there's been years where I've had a challenge with the solo. The mental aspect is the biggest challenge for me, and probably a lot of people. But just those thoughts creeping into your mind, like, what are the chances I'm going to run into something? Like, I'm not spending, say, I have 2 or 3 weeks of vacation for the year for hunting, and I'm spending all of this out here. So there's been times I've left early, but I know what that feels like. And I know, I guess after that, like on your way home, you're like, I shouldn't have left. So those experiences has helped me kind of learn myself, and help me stay out there longer and what I need to do. So I guess in those previous hunts, I've woken up early, hunted as much as I can, and basically either burn myself out, um, from a lack of sleep or a lack of the nutrition is a big was a big challenge before, and then those mental games. So then, just my goal this year and over the past couple of years has been, staying out there, and backpack hunting for, say, if you're out there for 2 weeks, and like thinking in your goal like you're going to be out there the entire time, until you're successful, is difficult. So I've kind
Yeah.
of learned, like, halfway through I'll take a break, whether that's going into town, getting a shower, good food, going back out, um, or just like this year, I just had a nice camp by my truck, so I had hiked out halfway through, refreshed and, restocked, and then went back out there, and that's gone a long way to just keep me out there through the whole hunt.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, especially when you're doing this solo, but it can be true on many hunts and in many cases. I mean, I've loved the like some of the experience that I've had that are, just pure 10 days. Like there's no chance of coming out. There's no place to go out to, right? Like the super remote extended stuff in Alaska, for example. It's amazing. But there's been plenty of times, like on elk hunts and other hunts in the lower 48, where it's like, man, if you're just getting your butt kicked for, 3, 4, 5 days in a row, even just a few hours, even like a half day, if you're coming out to move spots or resupply or what have you, and kind of even just like the mental reset, is huge. And again, if you're solo, it's even going to be more critical, I think. You talked earlier about, I mean, you talked about on one hand being out there the whole time, but then you also talked about getting up early, wearing yourself out, that type of thing from the grind. Has How have you managed your time? Like, other than just like what we said about taking breaks maybe halfway, right? What have you done specifically, strategically, logistically about managing your time? Is it a change in hunt style of like, hey, I am going to backpack hunt versus, day hunt from a base camp or a truck camp or whatever? Is it, not going back to the tent midday? I'm just curious, like any of those changes or ways that you've adapted to on one hand make the most of your time, while on the other hand not killing yourself.
Yeah. So I've been kind of migrating myself into just backpack hunting. So keeping my camp on my back, the whole time. That has, of course, if you have lightweight enough equipment, that's easy enough. I guess early on, I was doing for like elk archery elk, a 1 week hunt. And I learned pretty quickly, like, that is way too short for me. Of course, driving a day or 2 days there and then hiking in, and then say by like Tuesday, or and you're solo, like say Tuesday or Wednesday, you're thinking, I need to get something on the ground by Thursday. And then because it could take me a couple days to get out, I just felt rushed during the whole hunt. So I was getting up before sunup, getting camp on my back, start hunting, and then by midday I was a bit tired, so I'd take a nap. And then through these podcasts, I've learned like that midday has been a pretty successful time for most people. Most of what I've heard, except for one or two, not a lot of people have success in the mornings. So I've recently just stuck to a 2 week elk hunt, archery elk hunt. I don't feel rushed. The morning I sleep until I wake up. So I didn't, like on this hunt, I didn't get up before sunup at all. Like still early, but I'm not in a rush. Find out where the elk are going, but really making sure I'm hunting during those high probability times of having an encounter. So those middays and the evening, and I wasn't taking any naps throughout the day, but yeah, just making sure I was either set up and calling or in an area and have the opportunity during those high chances of encounter times.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's pretty similar as well for me. And what you said about sleep is key. And people think that backpack hunting would be harder when you're carrying camp. But I find it harder kind of not to backpack hunt and be covering a lot of miles to get in and out of elk country, say from the truck. But then also what you said of you just inherently end up needing to wake up much earlier and then typically get back much later. So like if you want to hunt daylight, it's much easier to wake up where elk could be 200 yards away than it is when they're 2, 3, 4, 5 miles away, right? And then the miles and the time you're burning to get in and out, to me, that becomes way more exhausting than just being out there moving with camp on your back, hopefully getting on elk, right? And then just being right near elk. Yeah, I just find it, I have much more, even though I'm putting on a lot of miles still, generally, I'm doing it without a lot of back and forth. Like I'm doing it on elk versus, or, definitely times searching for elk, but just not like these kind of wasted miles in the dark, early or late, I'm just not burning miles when I'm not hunting, essentially.
Yeah, that's what I've found the best for me as well.
We could probably talk for hours and hours and hours about lessons and experiences in those dry years. But like you said, last year, you killed a cow. This year, we're going to talk about you killing a bull. I do, want to give this year's story like full justice and talk about it. At the same time, I don't want to gloss over last year's hunt. One, I think people don't like talk enough about, especially with archery elk, over the counter public land stuff, like killing cows, fill in the freezer. I think it's awesome. And people, I've seen so many people who are like, yeah, I just killed a cow, and they almost don't want to act excited and whatever else. And it's like, man, if you're hunting on a either sex tag and again, over the counter at public land, dealing with pressure, dealing with all the adversity, especially in your case, solo, I think it's freaking rad. So yeah, tell us about, I just want to hear a little bit about that kind of first taste of success of after all these dry years out there on your own again and filling that first tag with your bow.
Yeah. So again, this was an area I was in before with a rifle. And I think, yeah, one thing of going back to areas that you're familiar with, I think is pretty key. I had previously just loved hunting new areas every time, but you don't really learn the area or find out where the elk are until it's about time to leave. So I've started going back to these areas that I've been to. And even this one, it wasn't a hugely but I didn't get into elk at all essentially until that one day. So this was, or it was about 5 miles in, and the area that this is, it's not a hugely dense, like every step is difficult type of area. It's pretty open. There's a horse trail to get into the area. So it's a pretty big climb at first, but once you're up into the area, it's not too difficult of hunting. And there's some big open meadows and then clusters of timber. So this was again like 5 miles in. I had ran into another guy solo hunting with a longbow back there, and turns out I set up my camp right next to his, but I didn't see him until he had hiked back from hunting that day.
Oh, wow.
We were literally set up like 20 yards from each other. But yeah, we talked, and nice guy, and I'm still in touch with him. But we ended up hunting together that next day, and neither one of us had seen any elk yet. That next day in the morning, we heard a bugle, so we chased that. We got close to him, but not no shot. And then that night we split up, so we weren't next to each other. He set up on this meadow, and then I went and got into this cluster of trees in the center of a meadow. And I just started calling, because at that point I was just wanting to see an elk. So I know elk don't like to cross a big field if they don't see what they're hearing. So they don't see any other elk. So I wasn't expecting to get anything, but I just wanted to draw some elk out just to see like where they are, make sure there are elk in there. And sure enough, this close to dark, this elk, cow elk, comes out of the timber and starts walking across the field right at me. She got to about 40 yards, but I was in front of the tree that I was calling by, and I couldn't get my bow drawn.
You were just too tight to the tree to draw it back?
No, she saw me. She just kept looking
Oh,
at me.
okay.
Every little movement I made, she would jump, until I went to try to just draw, and she ran off. But I called her back. So the next time she was coming back across the field, I had gotten behind the tree this time. So then when she got close enough, I drew back and then kind of stepped out from behind the tree. And she had stopped at 40 yards. I was guessing because I had pre-ranged some bushes. She was about 40 yards in frontal. So I was like, I'm not that comfortable with this shot, but I was holding it back as long as I could. And maybe it wasn't the best shot to take. I did feel pretty steady at the time, and it had been, I guess, at this point, 6 years without hunting, or without getting a shot off. So I felt steady. I had shot my bow a lot. So I guess side story. I spent 3 years in Missouri. So when my wife was in school, and they have basements there, which we don't in Texas. So I was shooting every day, which just like a 10-yard shot, but getting down there and just shooting every day, it really improved my shooting. So I was pretty confident. And I let that shot go and hit her perfectly. And she didn't get out of the meadow. Ran crash right before the trees, and so that was. Turns out there were some guys actually on another hunt. They had been packed back there with horses, and they got up on this hill above where I shot, and they saw me go into those trees, and they videoed that elk as I was calling it in. They didn't get the shot on video, but they had videoed me coming out of the trees after I shot. So they gave me their number that next day when I ran into them, and they sent me those videos. But that was cool.
What? How cool.
Yeah. But so then I was expecting to pack that out by myself, but of course I had met that other solo hunter, so he he helped me pack that. He took one load out, and then I went back for another load, and then he kind of met me halfway. So we got it. I gave him part of that elk, and so it was definitely worth the help getting it out 5 miles.
Wow, that's cool, man. It's kind of yeah, I mean, on one hand, yeah, solo hunt, you totally did it yourself. At the same time, it's pretty wild. You had those guys film it, and then you get to kind of get some help with the pack out and stuff, and you're still in contact with that guy. Those connections are cool when you just make them in the backcountry.
Yeah, and those are the. I mean, you don't. It's hard to meet people that do what we do. I think Trent from Born and Raised put it pretty well. Like when you tell people what you do, I walk around the mountains with 40 to 60 pounds on my back with the diaphragm in my mouth, calling elk so they come in so I can shoot it with a bow, so I can cut it up, put it on my back, and hike it out. People just look at you like you're crazy. But the people you meet back there, they have the same interests, and yeah, it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, same kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Well, with some success under your belt, did that give you like more confidence heading into this year? Just like inherently, it was like, okay, I can do this. This is possible after those years of struggle. Yeah, I'm just curious how that kind of changed your perspective and mindset.
Yeah, I think it was big. I think one of the podcasts I listened to of yours going up there, um, just someone was saying the mental aspect of saying like I expect to get a bull every year or get an elk every year. That was in my mind. I was successful. I knew it was possible now, and yeah, I think that helped a lot during this hunt. Is in my mind, I was getting an elk this year, and I think that's a pretty big advantage going into the field with your
Yeah.
bow.
Yeah. I mean, it just changes when you not only say that once, but when you can keep that mindset, perspective, attitude, and trust it. I mean, it does. It changes the way you hunt. It changes your willingness to do things. It changes your expectations. Yeah. I mean, people can say it's like woo woo, whatever, but I mean, it just makes a huge difference. It does.
Yeah, and even every like setup you make, just the mindset shift of setting up and calling, expecting nothing to come in because you haven't seen anything, to just I'm going to be ready because something it can change in an instant. When you don't see any elk for days, and then all of a sudden it's right there at 20 yards, um, and yeah, just keep staying ready and expecting something to happen during the whole hunt.
Absolutely. I had to laugh. So when you'd emailed me after your hunt this year, and you just kind of were sharing some lessons learned and takeaways. You said that on the way up to the hunt, you were listening to a podcast episode with us, and Steve said something about it being dumb for anyone hunting elk solo to go more than 5 miles or three, whatever he said, mileage wise, from the road. But then you said, I was planning on going in up to 10 miles and thought, F it. As soon as I've stopped worrying about extraction in the past, I started getting into more elk. So I'm going to stick to my plan. And then jumping ahead, obviously you kill a bull and it was 6 miles in. We don't necessarily have to go into the pack out story yet, but you did say, long story short, you can now agree with Steve.
Yeah. Um, I I guess I can. I don't know if I shall wait to tell the
No, I
story.
mean, if you want to talk about the pack out, you can. And it, of course, there's always like for people listening, there is obviously a lot of difference on people and their physical capabilities. And I think a lot of the concern is people who haven't packed out an elk, especially solo. It's easy just to talk about miles. We throw around the word miles all the time. But until you've done it and know what you're getting into, it's difficult. And then, of course, there's variability on terrain. Some miles are easier than others. And then, obviously, a huge factor is just conditions and heat and like time. So, are there conditions that would allow someone to be solo and pack out an elk 6 miles? Yeah,
So
absolutely. And then, are there conditions where it's a bad idea no matter your physical capability? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I remember hearing that, and so I guess, saving grace or what I had in my mind was these miles that I'm talking about. There are mostly trail, so it is a pretty long trail to get back there, and the terrain isn't too bad. And then I was thinking, of course, my cow the year before, I had help, but I'm pretty confident. I mean, I could have done another trip and gotten that whole out myself. And then the last thing is I do know that there is an outfitter in this area with horses. Previous years, they have packed like random hunters, like people that aren't their previous clients. They would pack out their elk. Some years that they weren't doing it, but I was thinking, worst guy, just throw enough money at them, then they could come
Yeah.
help me out if I needed. So that was like last resort type thought. So that's why I didn't change my plan. But the miles were a lot of miles. So I think regardless of the terrain, the amount of miles carrying a good amount of weight is going to be difficult. Of course, especially if it's rough terrain, it'd be even worse. But
So obviously we are skipping ahead, but let's go ahead and talk about the pack out a bit. You're roughly 6 miles from Trailhead or from the truck when you killed the bull.
yeah, so I shot him at night, and I guess I can get into more details later. But I didn't end up finding him until the next morning, and that was my primary concern with packing this thing out. The time it took, or the time it was going to take to get him out. So I was worried about meat spoilage. So essentially, right away, I didn't have the number of this outfitter, but I messaged my wife on my InReach to see if she could send me the number. Just I was going to check if they had availability to come, but I started cleaning and cording them up, and they had a short time span where they could get back there with horses. So I ended up getting all the meat to them, and then I packed out the head and my camp 6 miles. So I just made one trip out. Uh,
Okay.
I kind of felt cheated because I wanted to pack them out myself, and there were some other hunters I had met in that area. I think they were further away from me at that time than my truck was. But they had also offered if I got something on the ground, they could come help me pack it out. But I ended up getting those horses out there, and then having to just make one trip. But that one trip was pretty rough with 6 miles, even though it was a fairly easy hike. I think the amount of time it was going to take for me to pack it out, especially letting that elk sit overnight, I hadn't thought about that previously. I was expecting if I had to pack them out, the meat, it was cool enough at night. It was in the 30s. So, the frost had frozen over on my tent. And in the shade, I think during the day it was in the 50s. But if I had gotten them cleaned up and hung up that night I shot them, um, they would have been packing them out multiple trips by myself.
Yeah, I mean having those resources, one in mind, and then two, you know, uh it's like there's a line between not counting on a resource like that. Like, oh, I know there's an outfitter in this area generally, so does that change your plans or not? Versus knowing more specifically, like how to get in contact with the outfitter, how readily available they are, that type of thing. Because I've definitely seen that bite people where they've just relied on it and then come to find out that they can't use it, and then they're in a situation they wish they weren't in. Yeah, but I'm glad it worked out for you. That's great.
Yeah, that was, I guess, one of my questions that I wanted to talk about is once, like, should I have been, because if I wasn't worried about the meat, Um, Obviously, the cost of getting the horses in there was pretty significant. So I would have packed them out myself. But my concern about the meat going, like once I got the meat off the elk
Hmm.
and hung up and cooling, is because I let them sit overnight. Does that take out, like, could I have let that meat hang for another day or two and it would have been fine? Like if some of it had spoiled, would I have
Hmm.
lost any more, you think?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, um, I think so. There's two things. One is the elk sitting overnight and the condition of the meat by the morning. And then talking about if you're packing this thing solo and say it takes 2 days, I mean, those are separate, but they are related, right? Um, I don't have a ton of experience with elk in particular, just a little bit, and then more so with deer on having needed to let some stuff sit overnight. And really, yes, there's the general uh, temperature, like overnight conditions factor. But then you look more specifically at where stuff tends to go bad there is going to be obviously the larger muscle groups that are just going to hold more heat. And then at times the one that um, are more ground side, more down, some of that heat gets trapped versus the side that's up. But then even more importantly, especially on something like elk with these really large muscle groups, is just the depth of that meat, the innermost part of that against the bone, say on a rear quarter, like that's gonna be the last thing to cool. That's gonna be most of the heat is. And so there can be a little bit, again, I'm not the expert here, but what I would be looking at would be even if I was planning on, like if I shoot an elk, I leave it overnight and come back tomorrow, I would be, if I'm packing that thing out bone in, still at least slitting those quarters to look at them. One, slitting them to let them breathe a bit. If I still feel like there's some heat trapped in there, but then two, kind of to inspect against that bone and kind of see like, man, is there, kind of some bone rot going on inside that I can't see if I'm not cutting into that quarter, if that makes sense.
And is that judgment based on you're looking at color or smell?
Yeah, I don't think that early that you would see much by color. I haven't anyway. Again, I have limited experience, so I'm not the expert, not pretending to be. We've talked a bit about this, not this exact scenario of leaving an elk overnight, but we had a podcast with, I'm trying to blank on her name, but she's an actual meat scientist. And we talked about how to tell if meat is bad. And of course, you can do these extreme cases of like flies, maggots, whatever. But other than that, it is trusting your senses. Somewhat that could be visually, but more so by smell and things of that nature. So definitely at some point where something's smelling sour, obviously looking sour, discolored, etc. But I just don't. Again, my very limited experience leaving stuff overnight, I haven't seen discoloration happen that quick. But I'm sure it could in certain instances. And then that is going to be somewhat localized, right? Like if you have some bone rot in a quarter, or you have a spot that was maybe ground on the ground, maybe you add moisture as an element, that type of thing. That doesn't mean that that whole quarter, that whole section of meat is ruined. You definitely want to trim it with, I don't want to say excess, but with, being conservative. But there's other meat that's part of that larger region of the body that could still be fine, I would think. Yeah, I would say I'll leave links to these two, but that with Sierra Jepsen is her name, the meat scientist. And there's actually a really good episode way back in the podcast archives. I had no idea what the name is, or sorry, the number is, but I remember the name was How to Save Your Meat from the Heat. And this is probably like 2016, 17, 18. But it's definitely something worth going back to. And it would definitely teach you more than all my ramblings there. So yeah, that's a factor. And then I think again, if you were to have identified some level of meat that's spoiled or beginning to spoil, you trim that. The rest of the meat at that point, I don't think you're timeline has changed for packing that out, right? So if we've trimmed what is concerning from letting this elk sit overnight, I don't think that in general the rest of the meat would be more prone to spoilage in the conditions specifically that you mentioned, right? So if you have lows in the 30s, highs in the 50s, you're keeping this meat in the shade, it's staying dry, it's in good game bags where animals, bugs, etc., are not getting on it, and it's clean. I think you would. I mean, I have experience of leaving meat hanging again, clean, dry, in the shade, in those types of conditions and temperature ranges for many days.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. So yeah, I ended up so I guess I would have been fine. I do remember the like slitting the quarters down to the bone to let those cool, and I would have done that if those horses weren't coming. But I ended up, yeah, right when I found them, I had messaged my wife. She ended up calling the outfitter and made some jokes and got convinced them to get to me because I don't think they were going to come unless she kind of made friends with the with the outfitter. So they ended up. I got their number and messaged with them with my inReach, and they said, "What we're going to be there at 2." This was 10 o'clock, so I had 4 hours to, and I needed to get them to somewhere where the horses could get to. So I had 4 hours to quarter them up and shuttle the meat about a half a mile to the where the horses could get to. So that was my I guess primarily packing meat, quartering and packing meat to the trail, which I was able to do in 3 trips, and I got there like 10 minutes before the horses got there. So they
Oh wow.
and then they had to get out, so they loaded up the meat and took off, and I went back and got the head, caked the head, removed the lower jaw, and then got all my gear and my camp, and then hiked out the 6 miles from there.
So you recovering the elk didn't notice anything as you were breaking it up, anything concerning with the meat, smells, colors, whatever?
The only thing I got the tenderloins out, and those smelled like they were bad. So I did lose those. The rest of the meat, I didn't notice anything bad at the time. Once I did drop it off at our processor near me here, I dropped it off, and he said that the meat looked good. He did, I think, catch a whiff of something on one of the quarters, but they're going to evaluate it for freshness and kind of let me know. But I haven't heard anything from them yet.
Gotcha. So a couple questions. Remind me one to come back to getting the meat to the processor near you. Um, but how about just this process? Like you're breaking down a bowl solo, a little bit against the clock. Any one tips, tricks, things you've learned, things you've seen and tried and worked well, or pain points in particular about that whole process and being solo?
So last year I had was the first. I've done a lot of deer solo, and the gutless method, of course, on the ground, and it's uh, I would say fairly easy to do by yourself. So if you had done that, it's kind of the same thing. It's just everything's heavier and more cumbersome, but it's not really any different. So I was able to do it fairly easily. One thing I probably did incorrectly this year is I haven't packed just from a weight standpoint. I don't pack a sharpener. So I have a Benchmade Altitude with and then a Havlon with the replaceable blades. And I've pretty much been able to get through everything with those, primarily using the Havalon and then the Altitude for anything where I need a thicker blade. But with this one, by the end of it, my Benchmade, I couldn't cut paracord with that thing. So
Oh wow.
uh, I'll be packing some kind of sharpener, either a strop or a sharpener in the future, and just maybe every quarter touch that one up. But I ended up having to resort to the Havlon and ended up breaking the blade on there. I had plenty of blades, so I was fine. But the the picture I don't think looked like it, but he did die on. He was going up a hill, a fairly steep hill, and he died like halfway up. So the first half of it, the quartering was pretty easy because he was in a great position to get the quarters off and get the back strap on that side off. I think I should have, when I was going to flip him, I oriented him where his head was uphill. And then I could just kind of roll him over rather than if I had flipped him, he probably would have rolled way further. But I had rotated him so his head was up. And then when I did roll him, he did end up sliding down. I think I should have tied his antlers off. Probably would have helped. But yeah, nothing specific. The one thing I did do this year, last year I had a Tyvek tarp to help like get under him when I roll him over just to keep the meat clean. And that worked great. I did lose that tarp, I think, because I left it in a Ziploc bag covered in blood for too long. And so I couldn't get the smell out. But this year, and it was fairly expensive. So I used I thought I remember hearing someone saying that you can use a space blanket. So in my med kit, I do have a space blanket, and I started using that as kind of a meat tarp, but I would not do that again because that meat just sticks to that thing, and it tore pretty easily, and it was harder to keep the space blanket off the meat than it was helpful. So I wouldn't do that again. Go back to either some kind of ground sheet or a Tyvek worked great last year.
Got it. Well, we did all this talk of a dead bull and packing a oh shoot. Gosh dang it. I was gonna get away from this, but I did want to ask you about getting it home. People are always interested in this topic. Out of state, driving home, getting back home to a processor. What did that look like in terms of just logistics on keeping that meat cool? Types of coolers, numbers of coolers, ice, dry ice. What did you do?
Yeah, I have a 75 quart Yeti with where I put my drinks and meat in and fill that up with ice. And then I have a 145 quart Arctic. I don't know if they're quart or liter. But yeah, a big Arctic cooler, and I leave that empty. So when I get the bowl or I get the meat into that cooler, and I take the ice from my other cooler, I used to just fill that Arctic cooler up with a ton of ice, but it's very difficult to get that ice out and then the meat in there. So I stopped doing that, and I'll use the ice from my other cooler to kind of get in there. And then once I get into town, I'll pack it all up with ice. What the meat is in there, and I leave it. So I take the meat out of my game bags because I think one of the podcasts is like kind of aging your meat in your cooler. So I leave the plugs open at the bottom, and I just put the raw meat in there within the ice, and then let that ice kind of melt and cool and clean the meat while on my drive home.
Do you typically have to like add more ice, stop and refresh it, or mostly have enough where it's just able to get home and not worry about it?
I filled it up once. I refilled it once on my way home, but I don't think I needed to. It's just, yeah, it'll get me all the way home.
All right. Well, we did all, like I said, started to say, we did all this, a bull is dead. Here's how we took care of it type discussion and didn't tell any of the hunt story. Um, Yeah, I don't, and if I overlooked it, I don't actually know. Was this like super early into the hunt? Was it a crazy grind and later and longer into the hunt? So yeah, tell us about the actual hunt since we skipped it.
All right. So yeah, I'll go day by day. Probably skip some days, but going into an area that I had hunted before, I knew where I wanted to get to because I'd gotten into elk there before. So I just started hiking in. The first, say, 6 miles of the hike is not hunting country. I'm going in through basically a canyon bottom, crossing some streams, or river. I think one was a river, and then you got to hike up about 1,600 feet to get up into the elk country. So that took around, actually, I think it was like 4 miles to get in. Um, I got in that first night, set up an area called, but didn't hear anything. Set up my camp, and next day, of course, got up, started hiking further. So I had gotten about halfway to where I wanted to get that first day. So I was on my way to where I was trying to get to, and around noon, I had heard a bugle off of the trail. So I was like, okay, I'm not to where I want to get to, but there's an elk, so let's go hunt him. So I veered off that trail into the timber and started set up and started calling, and I heard two bugles going off into the timber on the hill above me. And I hear this elk starting to come. I've set up. I have some shooting lanes, and hear some branches break. They always come, and then I hear a cow call, and then more branches break, and I was like, it's right there. So I started drawing my bow back, and this cow jumps out into the opening, stops 30 yards frontal. I was at full draw, and I got a cow last year, so I'm trying to get a bull this year. So I passed on her, but she basically stood there until I had to let my bow down, and she ran off. And I thought those bulls were coming in too, so they kept bugling, but and I was calling back to them, but one was moving further away, and then one I just stopped hearing bugles. So I stopped there for that that night. I kind of hunted that area a little bit longer, set up camp, and hunted that area the next day, but never heard anything else. So I started moving further down the trail to where I was wanting to go, get into this canyon, and I hear a bugle kind of right off the bat, and it sounded really far away. I set up, I called back, and then all of a sudden it was really close. So got excited, dropped down into that canyon a little bit further, set up on with some shooting lanes, and I was calling. And sure enough, I heard they kind of it was like a crackled bugle, and then I saw some movement with a guy with a bow. So it was another group of hunters that time. So I went over, talked to them. I think I mentioned them earlier, but group from Arkansas, nice guys. There was one of them first elk hunt, and I was pretty sure we were like 10 miles back in there, and so told him I was pretty impressed with first elk hunt hike back that far back
Yeah.
with his buddy. So but the next so we parted ways. They told me kind of their plan. They were hunting that area, and they were camped. They had set up camp, I think it was over 3 miles away, 3 or 4 miles away from there, and every morning they were waking up, hiking to that canyon and hunting that all day, and then hiking back. So they were saying that they were getting up at 3 in the morning and hiking all the way in there, and then hunting, and then hiking back at night. And it's another reason why I just hunt with the camp on my back. So the next day, I slept in that canyon, saw a few grouse, Didn't hear any elk. Um, Later that morning, I got into another bugle, calling back and forth and moving closer. And I was like, this bugle sounds like the one from yesterday. So I hiked up. I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's those guys. So I hike up towards them, and sure enough, I found those guys. So same guys. Talked to them a little bit longer, and that's where they offered to, if I got something on the ground, to then they showed me where their camp was, so I could go by and get them. They'll help me pack it out. But the area they were camping was near where I had ran into I got those two bugles and the cow, that I ran into. So I was planning on going back to that area and hunting, or I could have gone further in, and this horse trail makes a big loop, where you can go around the back basically and come back down this other canyon, and then that trail ends up meeting up with the trail I came in on. So it was another 8 mile hike that day, but ultimately, I was ending up closer to my truck, so I decided to go over there instead. So I wasn't in the same areas as that other hunter, group of hunters. But so I started hiking further in. At some point, I was probably 10 to 12 or 12 to 14 miles probably from my truck, but I wasn't hunting at that point. I was just moving canyons. So I guess on that hike, I was crossing a big meadow when this lightning storm hit me. And I guess hearing about those two guys, that was out there I think it was the same day or the day after that they had got hit by lightning. But
Dang.
uh, I backtracked because I was out in the middle of this field when this lightning storm came up pretty quick, and I went back, got to lower ground. There were a few trees in the area, but I got under one of the trees, and basically rode out that lightning storm. But so yeah, I'd be interested to hear something related to lightning safety, if that's the right thing to do or not.
Yeah.
um, so that passed. I ended up getting over to this canyon that I was moving to, and that night, so this was day 5. I had gotten to this new area. It was kind of similar to last year, where it had been several days. I hadn't seen or heard any real elk. So I set up on this large meadow and started calling. And this nice 5x5 comes out. He wanted to cross that meadow, but he was looking for other elk, and he was about halfway across, and he was bugling, and then he started barking, and then bugling, and then he was pacing, and I I was trying to call to him, but I think what I should have done was maybe back up into the timber that I was in. Like go backwards and start calling, see if he would come across, but I wanted to keep my eyes on him. And he ended up exiting. He went back out the other side of the meadow and went up into the trees. And there was enough light at that point. I basically ran across that field to get into those trees and start and see if I could call him in, but I didn't have any luck with that. So I went back, set up camp that night, and then that next day I just worked through that timber on that side, slowly, kind of still hunting, calling. Never heard anything until kind of late afternoon. I had set up to eat, or I stopped to eat a little bit, and called, kept my bow close because I know people have had elk come by while they're eating. So I would keep my bow, arrow nocked and bow close while I was eating my lunch. And then I think I had packed up and maybe had hiked 15, 30 yards until I jumped an elk. I didn't get a great glimpse of him, but I I figured he was that bull that I had seen because this was the area where I had seen him the night before. But no shot off, and then I kept calling, but didn't have any success. So that next day was supposed to be storming pretty bad in the afternoon. So I took that day 7 as my basically refresh day. So I had hiked out, got back to my truck, set up I got a tent and a teepee tent with a furnace or a stove.
Yeah.
So that was nice. I bathed in the creek. That was pretty cold, but refreshing. Got some good food, camped by the truck, and um, refreshed clothes. So that was a nice. And then it did start storming, so it rained pretty much that whole afternoon. And so it was nice being by the truck at that during that day. So I felt refreshed enough to hike back in to that. So I went back to that same area. This was day 8, 6 miles in. Set up my camp, and instead of I went to the other side of that meadow where that bull came out of, and then I got like 30 yards into the timber and set up and started calling. This was around 4 o'clock, and was calling for probably 30 minutes. And one thing I remember people saying from your podcast is they could come from anywhere. So like I was expecting them to come from the timber in front of me. But every once in a while I would look behind me, and all of a sudden I see this bull coming across the meadow silently. He didn't make a sound. He was coming straight at me. And so I got ready.
Let me cut you off for a second, just to dive into your calling. So you said that you'd been sitting there, I think you said what, 30, 35 minutes, something like that.
Yep.
So how are you calling? How often are you calling? What are you doing? I mean, we've obviously had podcasts with, the experts, right? But like, how have you adapted that advice or just like made your own strategy for these like, essentially cold calling setups? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I downloaded the ElkNut app, and you can download basically every video and sound he has on that app. So I pretty much listen to that while I'm out there every day. And I guess the areas that I've been, I think I've only had 1 or 2 instances where I've actually bugled in a bull. Everything else, it seems like bugles have scared the bulls that I've been hunting. So I've been on this hunt. I would bugle to locate, but if I'm doing cold calling, I primarily cow call, and I'll do basically what he says for the cold calling sequences. But cow call for a few minutes, try to sound like multiple elk, where I use the tube to kind of display or procrast the sounds into different areas. And then I'd use different reeds just to try to sound like different elk, or use an external reed call. And I'll call for a few minutes and then stop for 5 to 10 minutes and then call again. So I just do that for an hour, and then move on and to a different area and then do that again. So then, so I see him coming towards me, and at that point, there was a bunch of trees between he and I, and he could have gone to the left or to the right. And this was my first mistake. I lost sight of him where he went down into this like valley. I couldn't see him. I should have drawn my bow then, but I was waiting to see which side he was going to come up. And as soon as I knew he was going to come up to my right, and he was coming, I guess, fairly quickly. So there wasn't a whole lot of time where he had a head behind a tree at that point. So I drew my bow. He jumped a little bit and kind of ran back, and I just held my draw and called a cow called to try to get him to stop and come back in. And luckily he did. So he started coming not to me, but he was going to come like, I think probably 6 to 10 yards from me. But after he had jumped back, and then he came across the shooting lane, and I know from your podcast that they take an extra step and a half, and I had cow called just a little too late. He took an extra step and a half, and most of his vitals were behind a tree or this little bush. And I thought enough of his vitals were out, and I leaned a little bit and let the shot go. And of course I knew it hit him. I hear the sound, and he ran straight away from me. So I think one of the podcasts I listened to, like making sure you remember everything about your shot, where the elk goes. So I was keeping all of that in my mind. I marked my spot on I was using Go Hunt maps. So I marked my shot from where I took the shot, and then the direction that he ran. And I was taking pictures. I got my phone out, took the picture of the shooting lane, basically trying to document everything and remember everything. After that, I give it like 30 minutes before I went to look for the arrow. And the arrow, it was a pass through. So the arrow was right there behind where I shot him. It was bright red blood, looked good. It didn't smell like guts or anything. So I was pretty happy with the shot, but I didn't see any blood near or where he ran. So I gave it another 30 minutes. So it's like an hour, but I had heard this gurgling groan, like in the direction he ran. I was like, that's him. He's dying. So, I marked that on my maps, the direction and kind of a distance, but primarily direction. So after I heard that groan, I gave it, I think, another 15 minutes or so. And then I just started hiking straight that direction. And I don't know how I missed him, or I passed him at some point, but then I started doing circles and zigzagging around that area. I was starting to go uphill, and then I was thinking they don't really like to go uphill if they're hurt. So I looked around a little more. I followed his tracks, and from after he shot, and I never saw any blood on the ground. So then I started second guessing things and getting worried. I ended up hiking up that hill where I had heard the sound, and I got to the top of that hill, and I heard some more bugles behind it. One sounded good, and then a couple more bugles. It sounded like a hurt elk. I don't know if it was a hunter or just a real lazy bugle, but I essentially thought that was him. So at that point, I backed out. It was I guess getting probably within an hour of being dark. So at that point, I decided to back out. So of course, that was a pretty terrible night of sleep, thinking I finally got this shot and had the best opportunity, and I messed it up. But went back the next day, of course, and just started gridding from where I shot him towards the direction. Again, just gridding back and forth. And then all of a sudden, I must have gone up this hill the wrong side, but halfway up that hill I had hiked up twice before, I found him keeled over.
You had been right there the day before, huh?
Yeah. Again, I don't know if it's a solo thing. It's less eyes, but kind of harder to find something by yourself with no blood, and just second guessing your shots. And if that I was worried about bumping him if he wasn't dead. But yeah, he ended up being 200 yards from where I shot him. straight line distance.
Okay.
And it was yeah, ended up being a kind of a high back shot. So I think I was a little off on the yardage, and then of course that tree kind of pushed my shot a little further back, but it was still it wasn't guts. It was still in the lungs, but I think that's why I didn't get any blood because it was high.
Yeah. When you were gritting, did you do anything there specifically to like mark what you covered? Like when we were searching for my elk this year, we were just really intentional about turning on our tracking. And so you think you cover stuff, but one thing I've found is when you are gritting, which thankfully I haven't had to do much, you just realize that even just based on your track on the screen, like an Onyx, or I think you said you use Go Hunt, it's like, oh, I actually missed this spot, or there's a bigger gap here than I thought, that type of thing.
Yeah, the night I shot him, I didn't turn my tracker on, but the next morning I did.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I had done that tracker before, I may have that may have helped me find him the night before. Um, but yeah, that I think that definitely helped the next day using the tracker and seeing exactly where you've hiked.
And obviously, you said like briefly that was a rough night. Did you kind of waver back and forth on how confident you were, or what was that like? All the things in your head? Was it just a lot of questions, or yeah, what was your confidence level?
Yeah, I guess at that point it ended up getting probably below 50% on the how confident I was that he was dead. I started thinking like maybe because I leaned, I didn't check my bubble, so maybe I don't know how much canted my bow was, but I was like maybe that's why I shot him too far back. I thought there was no blood because if I got the guts, it just plugged up the hole. Um, yeah, I didn't think at all it was a high shot. I thought I was pretty confident on the distance, but yeah, all those things kind of creep through your mind, and um, it's it's a difficult night to sleep after that.
Yeah, sure. Well, we definitely told the story non-chronologically, right? Because we recovered him at this point. We already know what it was like to break him down and pack him out and get him home. Anything else, man? Just like takeaways, questions, any of that stuff before we wrap her up?
Yeah, I think one thing I mentioned there weren't a whole lot of flies out there, but there were a ton of yellow jackets,
Mm,
and they were all over the meat bags specifically. But they were on the elk while I was cleaning them. But it's kind of a challenge to like I was going to grab part of them to try to clean, but there was a yellow jacket there, so I didn't want to get stung. But um, I guess have you heard any issues with meat with yellow jackets? And I don't know if they lay eggs or primarily just eat the meat, but any issues with them because they were even all over the bag after
yeah.
I hung it.
Yeah, um I don't have much experience. The worst encounters I've personally had was on skulls with yellow jackets. There's been times where in the field, yes, and then also like bringing a bull home and leaving a skull sit out back or something like that. Where there's one in particular I really had yellow jackets get on it bad, and I ended up using like I can't remember if I used a blower or a vacuum. I either blew them away or sucked them up. I don't remember. But in terms of meat in the field, yeah, I haven't had them bad, man. I'm not aware that they like lay eggs or anything. But yeah, I just haven't dealt with that enough. I'm sure someone will probably hear this and enlighten us with some stories or information.
So I guess one thing I probably should have addressed before, but I did have a issue with my wife being concerned about me. So she was in process of getting search and rescue out there to look.
Oh, dude, you mentioned this later and I forgot to ask. Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. What happened?
So this is completely my fault. It may sound like I'm going to blame you guys for part of
Oh,
it, but
I see
it's
where this is going. Okay.
definitely not. So um, historically, I have always of course, had my Garmin inReach. Anytime I get to a trailhead or out there at first, I'll message my wife, so she has my location and she knows I'm okay. Um, on my way up there this time, of course, we talked a little bit about how to kind of stay in the hunt, stay out there. One thing I'd heard someone say was kind of guys start checking out when they're messaging home with their inReach, and I may have kind of skipped a couple of messages with the inReach to kind of keep my mental in the game of the hunt. But I didn't tell my wife that, so I think day two, she started getting worried. And I had, of course, before I go out, I messaged her and checked my Garmin is working. But while I was driving to the hunt, she had like broken her phone, had to get a new phone. She didn't think she had my Garmin number, so she never even tried to message me because I had it on, so I figured if she needs me, she'll message me. But for some reason, she didn't think she had, or she didn't have my number. So she started calling Garmin. They were not helpful, which I need to figure out. I need to call them and figure out why, but they wouldn't give her my number or send a message to me on her behalf or tell her my location. They said someone's location is private. And I'm thinking, why, if I had a Garmin inReach and she's my emergency contact, why would they think I want my location private from her?
Yeah, especially with her being listed as the contact. Like I could understand if it was unlisted maybe, but that's weird.
Yeah. She called Colorado Parks and Wildlife to find out the unit I was in. I hadn't told her anything because I would say I probably became a little complacent in having that Garmin inReach. I can just message her, so I don't need to tell her my plans, which I think will change in the future. But
Mm-hmm.
she called the local game warden. They recommended calling the police department to file a missing persons report. So she called the local one in Colorado, but they weren't very helpful. They told her to contact the one in Houston. So that she contacted the one in Houston. They said it's a national database, so the local one in Colorado should have been fine. But someone had recommended her to contact T-Mobile to find my location, or Ford, because I have a Ford truck. So she said Ford tried to be the most helpful, but my truck's old enough they couldn't tell her anything. But she was in the process of day. So it was after 48 hours, she was actually filing a missing persons report, and I had messaged her like, "Hey, you haven't messaged me yet. I'm fine." And then, yeah, of course, she was pretty upset, but happy I was okay. And
How long was that total gap of communication?
I messaged her on the night of day three. So from when I had last talked to her on the phone, it was 3 days later.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely know people who have different like protocols, check-ins type thing. You know, if you don't hear from, like, I know one guy, it's like every 4 hours, which seems insane. But also, if you're solo, like, I also get it. It is what it is. Um, but yeah, I could totally understand from a wife's perspective. Like, okay, 3 days, don't know where he's at. Like, it's the same thing with, it's not the same, but it's the same idea of you shoot a bull and don't recover it. You have this long night of wondering and you work stuff up in your head. The same thing's going on in her head of, where is he? It's been a day. It's been 2 days. All that stuff takes over.
Yeah, yeah, and the yeah, I won't be doing that again. But
I'm sure she told you that you won't be doing that again if you want to go out and elk hunt.
yeah, but I survived the elk hunt, and then I survived my wife when I got back too.
C- Come back with a rack in your hand and your tail between your legs.
Yeah. Other than that, it's yeah, nothing much. I did want to mention, I don't know if you know about this. I don't know how Steve would feel about this, but made me think of y'all. I heard my sleep system, I think needs some improvement. I got horrible sleep. So I've been looking into some new pads and going with a quilt rather than my previous sleeping bag. But one thing in my research, I found this guy talking about this it's a Gigapump Air from aerogogo.com. It's a 1 ounce, and you can power it with your phone and pump up your sleeping pad.
Hmm.
So for those in the be a man, use your mouth boat, I don't know if that's something
Yeah.
anyone's interested in, but
Yeah, there's another I haven't seen that one. Another one that's crazy light. There's a guy, I think this is more of like a random dude I mean it's a small company, but I think it's like a guy. Rex Creations has one that's also really, really dang small. What is his? I'm trying to look up what his weighs. I don't know, but it's crazy small as well. And like same, it doesn't use a um oh, this one is point 0.3 ounces. And it doesn't use a battery. You plug it into a power bank. So it looks like a similar approach to that AeroGogo one. Yeah, I haven't seen that one. That looks cool. I definitely I totally fine without that pump. If anything, I pack it more out of spite to drive Steve crazy. But also the fact that the more I consistently use that Phoenix headlamp, it shares the same battery with the pump. And so essentially, instead of just carrying the pump with the battery, carrying my headlamp, and then carrying an extra battery, I let those two share. Works out pretty dang well. What are you thinking for sleeping pad? Have you narrowed it down to anything yet?
got three. So I have the Thermarest Neo Air, but it's the old one.
Mm-hmm.
And my issues, and I don't blow it up all the way, but I'm kind of a slot side slash stomach sleeper, and I turn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm falling off that thing all the time. The noise I don't think makes a big issue, but I want to go with a wider one. So either the new version of that, that's I think is a little bit thicker as well, and the wide, or the Nemo Tensor, or the Big Agnes Zoom Ultralight. Um,
Gotcha.
are the three I've kind of. I think I'm gonna from my system kind of take the approach of Jay over at Mindful Hunter, where I've got my puffy pants and jacket, kind of go with a warmer or a lighter quilt, and then just use the sleeping pad, and I should be fine for somewhat cold hunts.
Yeah, I think a wide pad would help since you toss and turn, but that quilt will help. Because essentially within the quilt, you move within it, right? So as you go from like left side to right side or stomach to side, you're moving within the quilt. Whereas with a typical mummy bag, you're kind of tending to roll with it and then you roll off of it because you have that slick bag on top of your pad. And for me, anyway, it's a lot harder to stay in place on the pad. So I think the combination of going to a wide and then going to a quilt will definitely solve at least some of that issue of coming off the pad.
Have you heard any thing about the Zen Bivy? I know a lot of backpackers like that. It's a little heavier, but it looks like a cool system to keep your pillow in place, and your quilt latches to this sheet that kind of goes around your pad.
Hmm. Yeah, we've had a lot of people reach out about it, send us emails, ask what we thought, and then definitely some people who have reached out just to say that they use it and like it. I don't, I haven't used it. I've never slept in one. I've seen them both online and a bit in person. To me, I think it's just solving a problem I don't have, right? So with my pad, with my quilt, with my pillow, I don't see any advantage there. I just see a little bit more, parts and pieces and complexity and weight in the system. Um, and again, I could be wrong. I just don't see enough benefit for me because I'm not having like problems that I think it would solve. So I haven't, wanted to buy one, right? Because I'm just super happy with my system.
Yeah. Yeah, I may end up sticking with the pad I have and just trying the quilt because I already donated my sleeping bag because it's been losing more feathers than I think it has left in it. So every morning I wake up and there's feathers all over my tent. But yeah, I think I'll try the some kind of quilt and maybe do the pad later. But also the I may switch to I know the you guys use the bivy with a tarp, and I've been using Argali TP.
Hmm.
As when you're setting it up and taking it down every night, I think it's like 8 stakes, and then I use the insert, and so there's five like connections between the insert and the TP.
Hmm.
It, every day it just gets a little kind of annoying to set it up so often, but is the bivy and tarp any easier than that, would you say?
It definitely can be. It definitely can be if you have fair weather and you're not concerned with the tarp and you just throw out your bivy, right? Like it's as simple as it gets. And there's plenty of nights where we'll do that if we have a tarp with us. We're not always setting it up just because we have it. There's so many nights you can tuck under the tree in a bivy. You're not setting up anything and staking it out, and you're not dealing with packing up something that has condensation on the fly and drying that out later. So that obviously that's going to simplify it. From there, it can be more or less simple just based on what type of tarp shelter you're going with, right? So we talked when we did kind of our bivy recap podcast, an article of there's like an inverse relationship between how simple a tarp is in design, like in shape, but then how complex it is to set up. So the more simple the tarp, you take a perfectly what they call a flat tarp or square or rectangle tarp. It has no shape, no structure, no design intent to it. It's super flexible, but that creates more complexity in the sense that because it's so versatile, it's up to you to figure out how to pitch it, the best ways to pitch it in different configurations, settings, conditions, terrain, etc. Or you can go with a tarp that's really more of a shelter, right? It's a tarp shelter, which is what we tend to use. Some of them have some versatility to it of like, hey, here's a couple options. A lot of them are going to be, hey, here's the way that this is meant to be set up. Because again, it's a shelter, not just a tarp. Um, and so, yeah, then you get into, okay, well, how big is it? Is it single pole or dual pole for the trekking pole? Um, again, there's like this inverse relationship between the number of stakes and then the number of or not, there's a direct correlation between the number of stakes and the number of panels in a tarp. So some could be really simple, where it's like essentially four panels and it's going to have a more minimal amount of stakes. Some are going to have more panels and therefore more shape and then therefore more stakes. The more panels and the more shape a tarp has, the better it's going to handle wind, right? Because you don't end up with these giant single flat panels that can take a bunch of wind. So when you create more shape, it's going to be more beneficial on wind, but then require more stakes. So yeah, short answer is it could definitely be a lot more simple if you go bivy and tarp, but it really is mostly just going to depend on what you go with for that tarp shelter.
Yeah, that was another thing on this hunt. I had used this first time I used shoes like hiking shoes rather than boots,
Oh yeah.
and I liked it during the first couple of days, but it did start to get pretty wet through the hunt, and I switched as soon as there was moisture on the ground. I had my rain gear because I knew the forecast had a lot of rain. So I switched to my rain pants, but I didn't have any gaiters. And I was just hiking through like wet grass all day, and then all of a sudden my feet were wet, and I had an extra pair of socks, but so I would like rotate them, but then both socks were wet. And have you? I guess when you guys go out for with like I know your rain gear is like a last minute added or don't, but if it's going to be a wet hunt, are your shoes also something you can go with boots if it's going to be wet?
Yeah, it depends on the length of the hunt, like how remote it is, the temperatures. Getting wet, but knowing it's going to have better temperatures and not be constantly wet is different than getting wet and knowing it's going to stay cold and a higher probability of staying wet. type thing. Yeah, I mean, it was on our archery elk hunt this month in Idaho. It was wetter than normal for Idaho for us, and there was days where my feet and pants got soaked. Just yes, a bit from rain at times, but more so from like that wet vegetation. We went through stuff that was just soaking wet and thigh high. Even if you would have had gaiters, you would have had moisture above the gaiters. But then it was also warm enough. It was like, then if you're hiking in your rain pants, you probably would have been sweaty. It was just one of those situations. It was like, hey, I'm going to get wet. But we had enough dry time where whether it's overnight or in the afternoon, stop and take a break. We just talked about this on a Monday Minute actually, but just simple stuff of whether it's overnight, during the day, when you take your boots off, take the insoles out, let those dry separately from the boots, get the boots upside down, try and use airflow, all that good stuff. For me, I'm more willing on a hunt like Lure 48, September archery elk, if it's not looking like constantly wet for days and days and days on end. In the vast majority of situations, I'm willing to get wet because most of the time I'm going to be able to get dry again. But again, you start getting into later season stuff or crazy remote extended backpack hunts, I'm much more concerned with staying dry when it either has more severity to it or it's just going to be harder to get dry, if that makes sense. Yeah, so there's just times where there's no good answer, right? Like we got wet from dew and moisture. We could have put on rain gear and put on gaiters. We probably would have got just about wet. And then when it comes to like you were talking about footwear of a boot versus more of a lightweight boot or hiking shoe, yeah, you can go to a more waterproof boot or a higher boot or like an all leather boot. The issue becomes when those things get wet, they are worse to dry. So in a situation like I just talked about on our recent hunt, I was wearing Salomon X Ultras, definitely not waterproof. But going back to, we were moving through vegetation thigh high and got pants wet. If I would have had waterproof boots on, they would have gotten wet because I would have had enough moisture traveling down my pants, traveling into my socks, traveling into the boot, even if I would have been wearing gaiters, that those waterproof boots would have gotten wet. And then once you have something that is effectively waterproof, it's inherently really freaking slow to dry and hard to get dry. So it's like the thing that's protecting you from moisture is also what's going to hold moisture when it does get wet. So yeah, it's trade-offs, man.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that first half I was using the shoes and just the lightweight. I loved it because it was so light compared to boots. But that second trip in, I had switched to the boots, but I obviously only hunted a day in those. So yeah, like both.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for sharing the story. You're on back-to-back archery elk tags filled, so you got to keep the streak alive next year. Make it 3 for 3.
Yeah, got to go. I think one guy you had on said 10 years in a row, which he just did. Sounds pretty nice. Gonna go for that.
Well, that is a wrap. Thanks to Ryan for joining us and sharing the story. Thanks to you guys for listening. If you have any questions, comments, guest suggestions, or even a hunt story of your own to share, reach out and let us know. Send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. It would be great to hear from you. If you haven't yet, be sure to also hit subscribe or follow in your podcast app so that you receive future episodes automatically, and we'll talk to you soon.